Tom Waits has recorded with at least 20 different guitarists, including himself, but his career began with very little guitar. His 1973 debut album, Closing Time, featured a bit of background picking and strumming by Shep Cook and Peter Climbs, but neither did anything more than accompany. On the next three releases, Tom played his own scant guitar parts, and then on 77's Foreign Affairs, there was no guitar at all. It wasn't until Blue Valentine in 1978 that guitar really became a staple, and Tom had three session guys adding to his own fragmented plucking. These three guests were Alvin Shine Robinson, Ray Crawford and Roland Batista. Alvin Shine Robinson had played with the likes of Dr. John, Carly Simon and Ringo Starr, and we can hear him playing those riffs on Whistling Past the Graveyard. And Ray Crawford played this beautiful solo on the title track. Now, if you want to see that solo in full, and I urge you to do so, you're going to need to click on the link and watch it separately on my channel. Because I nailed it. And YouTube's algorithm thinks it's the original recording, so I can't put it in here or it'll demonetize my entire video. But seriously, you got to check it out. It's a beautiful, beautiful guitar solo, played quite well, but more importantly, I put the tabs on it so you can play it too. Check it out. So let's talk about Ray. Born in Pittsburgh in 1924, Ray Crawford began his professional career playing tenor saxophone in Fletcher Henderson's band from 41 to 43. In an interview with Marc Webber in 1980, he said, "While I was with Fletcher Henderson's orchestra, I had tuberculosis and I had to go to a sanatorium for 2 years. That ended my scene with the saxophone and began my scene with the guitar, because that's where I learned to play guitar. When I came out of hospital, I was able to play enough to where I could play jobs. No chords, just solos." I love it. I love that. What did he care for chords? He was a saxophonist. They can't play chords. That's great. Apparently Ray liked to call himself H. Ray, and I'm guessing this was simply the initial of his middle name, Holland. Also, apparently, H. Ray could play a pretty mean B3. But then he gigged with Jimmy Smith for quite some time, so he no doubt picked up a thing or two. If you listen to his solo gear, which you can do here on YouTube or Bandcamp or other places, he played some sweet bebop jazz, and you can hear those types of lines throughout the Blue Valentine solo. Those lines over the dominant 7 chords. And he swings it too. He's just got that vibe, got that feel. H. Ray died in 1997. And our third guest, Roland Batista, was from Earth, Wind and Fire, of course, and he would go on to put some serious grit on Tom's next album, Heart Attack and Vine. Heart Attack and Vine is one of my favourite of Tom's albums, perhaps because it was the first one I ever heard when Mum bought it for Dad after they saw him on Australia's Don Lane show back in 1981. But I see this release as the first staggering step towards his wilder, bluesier, distorted dissonance that came to characterise Tom's more popular albums later on. Tom's own playing on the title track is brilliant and incredibly hard to mimic. He's in drop D. I think he's actually got both E strings dropped to D. And he's doing something like this. Track 2, In Shades, is also a favourite of mine. It's an instrumental featuring Roland Batista on lead and Tom doing some cool blues comping. So I think Tom's going... Roland, Tom, Roland, Tom, Roland, Tom, Roland, and then both of them. It's got these great stabs that are really tricky to count. I think you feel them rather than count them. Anyway, Roland Batista was quite the in-demand session player. He played with some huge names like Michael Jackson, Ella Fitzgerald, B.B. King, the Pointer Sisters, Bill Withers, George Duke. Wow. And Tom. You know, he played the 12-string on Jersey Girl on this album. Brilliant. And he also contributed a notable edge to the swagger of Mr. Siegel. Swordfish trombones is where we really begin to hear the Tom Waits that many know and love. That clanking, rattling percussion coupled with angular guitar lines wrenched out of twangy, cheap-sounding guitars through tiny, grungy amps. And that is thanks to Fred Tackett. Check out his work on the opening track, Underground. Fred was in Little Feat after the astonishingly wonderful Lowell George died, but he's another guy that's played with royalty. From Dylan to Ringo, Boz Scaggs to Neil Diamond, Ricky Lee Jones to Kenny and Dolly. The list is stupendous. Fred plays on 4 tracks on Swordfish trombones, Underground, Shore Leave, the wicked live staple 16 Shells from a 30-06, and Gin Soaked Boy. All great, but go and have a listen to his playing on Shore Leave because it's menacingly appropriate for the song. Another track on Swordfish trombones, Down, 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 features someone called Carlos Guitarlos. I had to mention Carlos Guitarlos because Carlos Guitarlos was the guitarist in Top Jimmy's band. Oh, Jimmy! Raindogs, enter Marc Ribot. Marc Ribot has also played for such incredibly huge and cool names as Elvis Costello, Robert Plant, the Black Keys, Wilson Pickett and Elton John. But we all know him because of Raindogs. Definitely because of his extraordinary contributions to the album, but also because the Raindogs tour finally saw Tom take a guitarist out on the road with him. And that guitarist was Marc. Now there are 2 or 3 quite audible guitar parts on the opening track, Singapore, both sounding very Ribot. However, another session guitarist, Chris Spedding, is also credited on that track. So you know what I love about doing things like this? The names it uncovers that I was entirely ignorant of up until this point, like Chris Spedding. Chris only appears on that one track on Raindogs, but check out his list of accomplishments. He produced the Sex Pistols' first recordings. He played with Eno, Jack Bruce, McCartney, Brian Ferry, Roxy Music, Elton John, Ginger Baker. Played the solo on Me, Myself, I for Joan Armatrading. He played on this. That's unreal. Sorry, Chris, I'd never heard of you until today. So I'm not sure what Chris played on Singapore. The main part is surely Marc Ribot's incredible twisted take on a minor blues. But perhaps Chris played those higher pitched contra lines that come in. Anyway, back to Marc Ribot. Go and listen to Marc on Cemetery Polka. It's insane. In an interview about recording with Tom, Marc said, "I remember one verbal instruction being, play it like a midget's bar mitzvah." When I listen to Marc, I feel like he sometimes does this thing where he attacks the strings so hard, plucking with his pick or his fingers, that it makes the notes sound sharp for like just a millisecond. It's so characteristic because it fits the whole homemade, found in the shed aesthetic. Listen to the title track for a great example of this. But Marc Ribot and Chris Spedding aren't the only guitarists on this phenomenal album. Keith Richards features most recognisably on Black Mariah and plays a similarly stonesy boogie riff on Union Square. And then on the sublime Blind Love, he's joined by Robert Quine's tasty picking as well as Tom's own strumming. But this is the thing about being a Keith Richards, someone with a thoroughly developed, world-renowned musical identity, as opposed to being a Marc Ribot. Keith isn't about to change how he plays just because he's a guest on someone else's album. Don't get me wrong, I love listening to him and Tom together. But do you reckon Tom asked Keith to change anything? Do you think he went, nah, Keith, play it more like a midget's bar mitzvah? Nah, but when Tom and Marc, or Fred, or Joe Gore get together in the studio, they change each other. Robert Quine, by the way, a quirky genius from the New York punk scene, also played on another of this great album's high points, Downtown Train. Although I'm certain it's G.E. Smith who plays this beautiful melodic hook and the other lead parts. When I see you tonight. It's just got that pop sensibility from the guy who played this. Yeah, G.E. Smith. We all know who that guy is. Hall & Oates, Jagger, Buffett, even played with Dylan. Marc Ribot also opens Tom's 1987 release, Frank's Wild Years, with even more outrageous, almost tuneless wonderment. His main riff on the opening track is played through a ring modulator, adding random overtones on the verge of cacophony. But then his second guitar comes in, and it's equally as edgy, because Marc leans on the whammy bar as he's picking and playing. He's making his twangy lines sound psychotically nerve-wracking. I don't know how it all comes together to sound so incredible. And I don't know how many artists would hear their hired gun turn in a performance like that and go, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was hearing in my head. Thanks, Marc. Oh man. Frank's Wild Years also introduces us to Morris Tepper, who had played with such left field artists as Captain Beefheart and Frank Black. Morris plays on Temptation, one of my absolute faves. Now there are two clearly audible guitar parts, an overdriven five chord figure, as well as that cool muted melody that hovers around the augmented fifth over the F minor chord. That's great. Now, I can't state with 100% confidence which part Morris plays, but if that muted isn't Marc Ribot, I'll go he. But then on I'll Be Gone, Morris does turn in a close approximation of what is now becoming a very identifiable style of guitar playing on Tom's songs. Those jagged single note lines. Half a decade after Frank's Wild Years, Tom released the sensational Bone Machine, with a cover shot taken by Bob Dylan's son. This album introduces us to the work of Joe Gore, who plays his massively detuned telly on 3 tracks, all stripped down with its cool wah riff, the awesome Goin' Out West, and Black Wings with its tasty solo and lead playing throughout. Joe tells us that Black Wings was a first take solo. I played it on the same guitar I used for Goin' Out West, a 1960s Telecaster strung with extra heavy strings and tuned down to A, a fifth below normal tuning. That extra low note at the end of the solo is just the open 6th string tuned far below normal. The loose strings flop everywhere and it's nearly impossible to play in tune. And I didn't, but in Waite's world that's a plus. The guitar is plugged straight into a silver panel Fender Super Reverb amp, which I used for most or maybe all of my work on Bone Machine. Now, when Joe claims it's impossible to play in tune, he's not exaggerating. The melody he plays on Goin' Out West is completely out of tune with the main riff. It's like totally microtonal, and it's, dare I say it, genius. Joe actually first met and played with Tom on the previous year's soundtrack to Jim Jarmusch's Night on Earth. Night on Earth was recorded like an old school soundtrack with all the musicians playing at once and no overdubs. It was my very first session with Tom. I was thrilled and terrified. Aside from Joe's sterling contributions, Bone Machine opens with Tom playing another of his own great riffs on Earth Died Screaming. Now here's an interesting thing. Larry Taylor, who had been playing bass for Tom since Heart Attack and Vine, plays guitar on Jesus Gonna Be Here. Just one note, sliding into the root note while Tom slaps his upright bass. But it's so bloody cool because he keeps playing that same root note even over the dominant 7 chord. I love it. Now Larry is worth a moment of our time because he was the bass player for Canned Heat for a start. He played bass for John Mayall, the Monkees, as well as playing on albums by a swag of mega elites from the blues world. Ry Cooder, Albert King, Buddy Guy, JJ Cale, Tracy Chapman. He played on The Healer by John Lee Hooker, for Christ's sakes. I love that album. This man has done so much cool stuff. The album's closing track also features a return visit from Keith, along with a guest appearance by session legend Waddy Wachtel. But as cool as the track is, it's not really worth revisiting from a guest guitarist point of view. It would appear that Tom didn't tour behind Bone Machine, but there are a couple of appearances to be found on YouTube, such as a wicked version of Going Out West on Arsenio with Joe Gore simultaneously playing the riff and the melody. Side note, go and check out Aussie blues legend Jeff Lang and his live solo interpretation of this entire album. You're very welcome. Joe Gore also played on The Black Rider, Tom's next soundtrack album. It's not really a guitar album, although I do like the riff on Crossroads and that dissonant intro to Oily Night. But Joe Gore, what an interesting dude. Editor of Guitar Player magazine, effects pedal creator, collaborator with a swag of amazing artists. His website, which is well worth a visit, contains this great quote pertaining to his development as he worked for Guitar Player magazine. A few hundred articles later, two strange things started to happen. First, my attitude about guitar changed. I stopped caring about things I couldn't do and embraced my quirks. I realised that playing expressively was more important than playing well. Second, I started getting invited to play on cool records. That's some inspirational wisdom. 1999's Mule Variations opens with Larry Lalonde playing his trademark haphazard wonderment on Big in Japan. For anyone who doesn't already know, Larry is the guitarist in Primus, the hilariously original and quite uncategorisable trio fronted by bassist Les Claypool. Now Claypool's bass playing is extreme. It's so full on. It's like he's basically covering rhythm and lead guitar parts. So Larry sees his job in Primus as adding texture. So he really plays like no other guitarist in a rock band. And for any of you who might think he's just a bit noisy, sloppy and messy, just know that prior to Primus, he played in a Zappa tribute act. My favourite guitar player ever is Frank Zappa. When I think of what makes a good guitar solo, Zappa's playing is the thing I think of. It's the ultimate example of how a guitar should sound. Oh, and he owns the guitar that Jimmy played on All Along the Watchtower. Tom himself makes a welcome return to the guitar on 7 tracks, playing particularly juicy riffs on Big in Japan and Low Side of the Road. Joe Gore also returns to play on a couple of tracks, the beautiful Hold On and Come On Up to the House. Track 4, Get Behind the Mule, sees Smokey Hormel make his entry into the pantheon. It features a couple of wonderfully fitting guitar tracks, with the main riff being played on what sounds like a broken down guitar through a broken down amp. It could even be like a nylon string guitar, but it's played beautifully, as are the understated blues licks that he adds on an electric throughout. Smokey also plays some gorgeous slide on his dobro throughout Pony. Smokey Hormel was born in LA and learnt guitar from Jimmy Weibel, Benny Goodman's guitarist, who also taught Steve Lukather. Smokey has played with Beck, Johnny Cash, Neil Diamond, Norah Jones and Adele, and that's just dropping the big names. He's also played on stunning albums by the brilliant Yebba, the funky Bernie Worrell and the hazy Marianne Faithfull. You've heard him before. It's Smokey playing on Johnny Cash's haunting version of Hurt. He plays on Justin Timberlake's Future Sex Love Sounds album closer All Over Again. And he wrote Long Shadow with Joe Strummer for Johnny Cash to sing. Smokey joined Tom's band for the Get Behind the Mule tour. Check out his solo from their VH1 Storytellers appearance. There are a few clips around if you go digging. I found one where he plays a sweet solo on Who Are You This Time, live in Stockholm, 1999. Marc Ribot is back with some lovely playing throughout House Where No One Lives and a nuts solo on Cold Water. Larry Taylor swaps to guitar again for a couple of tracks, most notably Filipino Box Spring Hog, where he adds some wonderful sparse blues alongside Marc. Tom's next album, Alice, is another soundtrack. Larry Taylor again contributes guitar to a couple of tunes, Everything You Can Think. This totally sounds like Marc or Joe, but the album liner notes credit Larry, so I guess all those years playing alongside those quirky fellas allowed Larry to render some of his own angular lines. Joe Gore also returns to comp his way through Tabletop Joe. It's not a huge guitar album, and there's no new names on the register. Blood Money, another soundtrack. Joe Gore is credited with playing on the sinister vaudeville of God's Away on Business, as is Tom himself. There's not really much guitar to be heard, but it's still an awesome track. Miles Boyson plays guitar on a great track called Knife Chase. It's an instrumental tune with a wicked diminished riff. Larry Taylor is also credited with guitar on this song, and if you listen with headphones on, you'll clearly hear two distorted guitars panned hard left and right. I have no way to be certain of who's playing what, but the guitar on the left is decidedly in character, very atonal and randomly phrased. This could easily be mistaken for Marc Ribot's work, so I'm thinking it's probably Larry after what we heard on Alice. Real Gone, an incredible album of Marc Ribot's haunted house textures and twisted melodies. Right off the bat, the opening track, Top of the Hill, features a great pair of contrasting parts, and the instrumental break at the 3-minute mark is pure cacophonic funk noise that just makes me smile from ear to ear. You should go and listen to it right now. I'll wait here. Let's just crack on. On Hoist That Rag, Marc invents a great rhythm part as well as an insane chordal solo section. The song is based on like A minor, D minor, E7 and A minor, but Marc creates this wicked little chordal riff in the verses. Before he unleashes this. Sins of My Father features both Tom and Marc playing throughout, but Marc's solo is amazing. It begins quite sweetly before delving into... well, you'll see. Marc's swing is almost straight on many of those phrases. A new name crops up on Real Gone. Harry K. Cody is a Swedish rock guitarist from the band Shotgun Messiah. They were basically like Poison, pretending to be Motley Crue, and then Skid Row, and then Nine Inch Nails. But Harry is a great guitarist. He has recorded some really tasty gear with Incredibassist Stu Ham, but listening to his smooth and melodic shredding on Stu's albums Kings of Sleep and The Urge had me thinking, how the hell did this guy come to be playing for Tom? Well, however it happened, the results are pretty cool and suitably rootsy. He plays guitar on 2 tracks, Don't Go Into That Barn, on which I imagine the gritty main riff is Harry. I mean, it sounds like a Tom Waits riff, but it's executed a little bit too cleanly and consistently to be Tom's playing. The other track is Metropolitan Glide, which features an hypnotic minimalist riff rendered in chiming octaves, and a great little lead line, although intuition tells me that lead line is probably Tom. In any case, Harry, the Swedish hair metal rock star, contributes to a couple of excellent songs. There's more Ribot beauty on Dead and Lovely, and a lovely solo. Marc scales back his out notes in favour of some sweet melody to suit the overall vibe of the piece. However, he still drops those recognisable Ribot breadcrumbs all over the place. Marc also lets rip on Let It Rain, and he went on tour with Tom behind this album. There are a few full concert uploads from this tour here on YouTube. In 2006, Tom released a set of 3 albums, Brawlers, Ballers and Bastards. Telling who played what on this release is problematic because the liner notes only tell us which artist played on which side. For example, we're told that Marc Ribot appears on Brawlers and Bastards. But as to precisely which tracks he contributed, that's left up to the listener. A few new names appear. Brett Gurewitz from LA Punk's Bad Religion, otherwise known as Mr. Brett. Dave Alvin, singer-songwriter and guitarist of country, folk, Americana. Blues artist Ron Hacker. Mark Linkus from Sparklehorse. And Mike Knowlton, who I can find almost nothing about, except to say that he's playing with an act named Gapeseed is appropriately experimental, and I can well imagine he's being invited to contribute to a Tom Waits album. And there are also a few regulars in there, Marc Ribot, Joe Gore, Larry Lalonde, Tom himself and Tom's son Sullivan. So let's see if we can pull it apart a little bit. On Brawlers, the track Lie to Me features a brief solo. I'm guessing it's Joe Gore. It's got his flavour about it. Lowdown has a great wild blues solo. I reckon this has got to be Ron Hacker. Ron is a blues guitarist from San Francisco who claims to have played pretty much every major festival in Northern California, as well as touring extensively in Europe. 219, this has a fantastically atonal solo. It sounds like Joe to me, or actually it sounds like it could be Larry Lalonde from Primus, but the album liner notes don't have him playing on any of the Brawlers. So I'm saying it's Joe Gore. Everything about that solo is edgy. If I could just indulge in a little bit of theory for a moment. Of the 39 notes that Joe plays on that solo, more than a third of them are out of key. He's playing like minor seconds. He's playing F sharp notes over the F minor chord. He's playing A natural over the F minor chord, the major versus the minor. Those dissonant triplets at the end. It's sensational. I love it. Next, surely we have Marc Ribot on Fish in the Jailhouse. It has Marc's jagged attack and bizarre jazz nightmare lines all over it. Now, I'm not 100% sure who played the solo on All the Time. It's a tasty slice of blues rock cliche playing, and it doesn't sound like either Marc or Joe to me at all. The other guitarists credited on Brawlers are Brett Gurewitz from Bad Religion and roots rocker Dave Alvin. Well, after checking out a few clips of Dave here on YouTube, I'm reasonably certain it's him. He nails those blues scale runs. His tone is quite sweet compared to the intentional harshness that we normally get from Joe or Marc. And his guitar is also very in tune, something that we don't automatically identify with Tom's recordings. Okay, moving to Ballers, there's really nothing of note. Both Joe Gore and Sullivan Waits are credited with contributing what little guitar there is. So on to Orphans. Book of Moses has this grungy acoustic slide riff. I'm saying Larry from Primus. He likes a bit of slide and he likes a bit of noise. First Kiss has got to be Marc Ribot. It's got no solo or riff, just scratchy chords that just sound very Marc. Dog Door features heavy riffs growing more bizarre as the song progresses. We know this is the work of the late Mark Linkous because the song originally appeared on the Sparkle Horse album It's a Wonderful Life. King Kong, great guitar track with a chordal riff and lead throughout. There's no out notes or lines. I don't really know who this might be. It was recorded for a Daniel Johnston tribute album in 2004, and Tom was working pretty much exclusively with Marc Ribot around that time. But it really doesn't sound like Marc's playing to me. Perhaps this is where the mysterious Mike Knowlton features. Or it could be Mr. Brett. Finally, On the Road has a crazy noisy slide solo. I'm going with Larry again for this one. For the Orphans Tour, Tom recruited the wonderful David Hidalgo, who up until this point had only contributed accordion and violin to Bone Machine in '92 and also some accordion to Frank's Wild Years way back in '87. David Hidalgo is best known for going as the frontman for the brilliant Los Lobos. David's voice is recognised around the world as the vocals of Richie Valens from the soundtrack of the movie La Bamba. But he's done a hell of a lot more than that. For a start, Los Lobos are an incredible band with studio releases spanning 6 decades. They've appeared on more than 30 soundtracks, including a couple of my faves. He's also a super guest, playing and singing on many amazing albums like Paul Simon's Graceland, Tony Child's House of Hope. He's on albums by Elvis Costello, John Lee Hooker, Roy Orbison, Ry Cooder, Dolly Parton. He's played on 3 Dylan albums. And just a quick one for my Antipodean viewers, David even played some accordion on the Crowded House album Woodface. In 2008, Tom launched his Glitter and Doom tour. His guitarist was Omar Torres. Me neither, but Omar is awesome. Glitter and Doom is a retrospective, and Omar plays through these classics with the perfectly haphazard and flawed for purpose attack that we've come to demand from Tom's sidemen. Yet he also manages to give us some insight into his own unique voice on the instrument through his tasteful and melodic solo on Falling Down, and then demonstrating his flamenco chops on Part You Throw Away. Now, I've got to admit, that was the hardest thing for me to do for this, pretty much this whole thing. I cannot play flamenco. I'm a terrible classical guitarist, but I had to try it. Lovely solo. In 2011, Tom released Bad As Me, featuring the work of 6 guitarists, 4 of whom we've heard on previous recordings. Marc Ribot, bass mainstay Larry Taylor, Keith Richards is back, and Tom himself. The title track contains 3 layered tracks, all Marc Ribot at his recognisable best. Bad As Me contains 5 tracks from the aforementioned David Hidalgo on guitar, and a couple featuring Will Bernard. Will is a Berkeley-educated musician from California who has led a swag of jazz trios and quartets. He's a super tasty and endlessly inventive player, and I thoroughly recommend checking out his YouTube channel, which hosts heaps of live clips. Will joins Tom, Marc and David as they strum through Pay Me. Keith then joins that ensemble on the daunting and intense Hell Broke Loose. Great track. David Hidalgo plays a couple of very characteristic solos on the album. One on the lilting mariachi of Back in the Crowd, and the other on Get Lost. David does a tricky little thing in that break where he bends the D note on the 15th fret up to an E, but then plays the E on the 14th fret of the D string. That took me a lot of goes to get that right. Very effective. Marc Ribot is also positively haunting on Face to the Highway. Have a listen to that one. Satisfied gives us Marc and Keith riffing against each other in jagged synergy. Kiss Me is a beautifully tender example of Tom's favoured chord shapes. Tom can also be heard playing on that album closer New Year's Eve. So, after having gone deep into the weeds to investigate the contributions of all these amazing guitarists, I've got to say, I really love Tom's playing. I mean, it all starts and ends there, doesn't it? Tom comes up with the chords, the moods, the stories, and also many of the riffs. His playing has attracted and no doubt inspired these players and catalysed those quirky contributions. Joe Gore tells us how Tom likes to work quickly, capturing the vibe rather than excessive fine-tuning and fiddling around. But Tom's playing is amazing and quirky. We had Heart Attack and Vine, Earth Died Screaming, Big in Japan. Check out his rendition of Lie to Me on Letterman in 2006. His playing is so cool while he's singing. You got to lie to me, oh baby, you got to lie to me. There's also a clip of Tom playing the wistful Looking for the Heart of Saturday Night, live and unaccompanied in 1975. I could just watch it over and over. He's in such command of the chords while he's just comping and telling his story before he actually starts the song. It's beautiful.
It's very simple. Saturday rolls around, you need a date, call yourself up, you're always gonna be around. When you ask yourself out and you ain't no fool, you're always gonna say yes. And I always take myself to class joints, I ain't cheap or anything.
And the guitar seems to be tuned way down. It sounds like maybe every string's dropped a tone and then dropped the E string down to C. He plays like no one else. Another great example is a live performance of Smuggler's Waltz, Bronx Lullaby, where he croons over his favoured 1- and 2-fingered chord shapes. This is really similar to his sweet picking on Blue Valentines. Lovely changes. Actually, Ray Crawford praised Tom's playing in an interview where he noted his single-fingered approach to chord shapes. So there we go. Now we know. Thank you so much if you've stuck with me to the end. This one was a huge undertaking, not just the research, but figuring out, transcribing, and then trying to cop the styles of these absolutely singular guitar players. It's been fun. Hard work, but fun. Now don't forget to show me some love, thumb one in softly for me, shoot me a comment, a request, an idea, a criticism, send me a tip via my tip jar, or better yet, support me on Patreon, where I host all my printable transcriptions and guitar lessons and exercises and so on. Love ya. And he wrote Long Shadow with, and he wrote Long Shadow with Joe Strummer for Tom Cat. And he wrote Long Shadow with, oh, why can't I? And he wrote Long Shadow with, no, I can't do it. Joe Strummer for Johnny Cash to sing. And he wrote Long Shadow with Joe Strummer for Johnny, four of whom we've heard on. Bad As Me features 5 tracks. Bad As Me contains 5 tracks with the aforementioned David Hidalgo. Bad As Me contains his playing has doubtlessly attracted. His playing has no doubt inspired. His playing has attracted and no doubt inspired these players, and catalyzed those quirky moments, and catalyzed those quirky contributions. I need to do that whole thing again. His playing has attracted and no doubt inspired these players. His playing has attracted and no doubt inspired these players, and catalyzed those quirky contributions. His playing has attracted and no doubt